Hey everyone, and welcome to the June Childless Chats Over Cocktails webinar. I am super excited about today's topic. We are going to talk all about bodies, specifically how do you love your body, feel connected to it, forgive it, all of these things when you are going through infertility or have gone through infertility or are experiencing chronic illness. So I know this is a topic that is relevant to a lot of us, and I'm really excited. I have some amazing guests, and so can't wait to dig in. I am drinking a hot toddy, which may sound weird because it's summer, but I am in Utah and it got really cold today for some reason. So, so as you guys are joining, I wanted to just do a little bit of housekeeping. So you are able to use the chat box, so you should be able to see there's a chat feature, and you can use that if you want to talk to each other as the webinar gets going. There's also a Q&A box, so at the end of the webinar, we're going to have time for you to ask questions to our guests live, and so you can use that Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. And with that, we can go ahead and get started. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Katie Suppy, and I run Chasing Creation, and started doing these webinars. I think this is my 9th month doing them, and have different guests every month to talk about different issues related to childlessness. And so I'm gonna let my guests introduce themselves. I have 2 amazing guests I can't wait for you guys to meet. So Heather, do you wanna start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how people can find out about what you're doing and connect with you?
Sure thing. Hey, it's so nice to be here, Katie. Thanks for inviting me. I am coming to you from, so you're in Utah. I'm over here in Asheville, North Carolina, which is where I met Katie originally. Let's see, I am a pelvic physical therapist. And for any of you who aren't familiar with pelvic physical therapy, I always often in a group, people don't know what that is because it's kind of the weird kind. We deal with pee, poo, and sexual dysfunction stuff mostly. So it's kind of like all the things in the middle of your body that, potentially could go wrong. That's where I come in. So let's see, I'm also a sex educator, and I'm also a sexuality counselor, which is the sex educator and sex counselor, kind of my favorite 2 parts. I really like the pelvic PT stuff, but I really like the sex education piece. I do a sex education, like live in a bar sort of show that has been on hiatus since the pandemic, but it's called Vino and Vulvas, and it's so much fun. It's an inclusive adult sex ed event that we do paneled on a stage sort of thing. And you can check that out at vinoandvulvas.com. A lot of my other stuff I do, I create non-binary crotch coloring books, which is a very strange phrase to throw together, but they're fun, they're educational. It teaches people about genitals and anatomy in a really fun, weird coloring way. And I teach nationally, professionally for pelvic health professionals. And so I teach transgender pelvic health, and I also teach sexuality counseling. And yeah, and I do all sorts of crotch art that shows up in lots of different ways throughout my project. So you can also, my other website that has a lot of my like crotch art and coloring book stuff is heatheredwardscreations.com. And both of those, Heather Edwards Creation and Vino and Vulvas, are also where you can find me on Instagram too.
Well, thank you, Heather. And I actually met Heather because she was my pelvic floor therapist. So we'll talk a little bit about that later and what that kind of looked like for me. But I'm very excited to have you here. And I would love it if you would tell our audience what you told me about the flowers behind you.
Oh, yeah. I was like,
cool.
oh no, what did I tell you? Okay, so I'm kind of strategically placed out here. It's way too hot and messy in my house right now, so I thought I would sit out on the back porch. And behind me there is a flower, this big bush. It's called an evening primrose bush, and we are right here in prime time for when it actually blooms. So you'll start seeing all these big yellow flowers pop open behind me. And so it's kind of neat. So if you notice that and you think, I didn't see flowers, and then all of a sudden there's flowers there, you are not crazy. It's a very cool bush that is popping open behind me.
I'm excited about this. I feel like I'm going to be distracted, like trying to watch.
If you want to like drag my computer over and we can like get a close up of one or something, but yeah.
Yeah,
And
I love it.
I'm drinking an Asheville Mandarina IPA from one of our oldest breweries here, which is Highland Brewery.
Nice. Thank you. I'm so excited that you're here. And Kat, I am very excited that you're here too. I feel like I found your account on Instagram quite a few months ago, and then have read a lot of the blog posts that you've done, since I found you. And there are certain aspects of our story, like how long it took us both to get diagnosed with endometriosis, and both having just the pain in the ass symptoms that come with the chocolate cyst. And I just felt like when I read your stuff, I was like, oh my gosh, I could have written this for like certain posts that you've done. And so I just think that your blog is one of the most informative that I found on like endometriosis and health. And you're just very consistent and awesome. So I'm really excited that you're here today with us. And I'll let you introduce yourself. Sorry, I feel like I kind of just told a little bit about what you do, but please introduce yourself. Let us know where we can find you.
Okay, yes. And thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this webinar. This is so awesome and exciting. So basically, my name is Kat Haagenson, and I created a Femmepower health blog. And it's pretty much all about women's health and my experience with discovering more about women's health, especially endometriosis, since my diagnosis. Just trying to understand all that women's health is, all that endometriosis is, and where I fit in all of it. So I have my blog, Femmepower Health, and I also have my YouTube channel where I try to create and spread more awareness regarding endometriosis, women's health, vaginal health, all the things that are kind of taboo and that we don't talk about because it's so private and taboo. So my goal is to pretty much increase awareness and to make it not taboo and to make it something that we talk more about so that more women can understand their bodies and they can understand the things that's happening, and we can improve the diagnosis for conditions like endometriosis, PCOS, adenomyosis, all of these types of conditions. So that's primarily what Femmepower Health is all about, and that's primarily what I do. You can find me on Instagram, YouTube, my blog itself, just Femmepower Health Blog. And that's where you can find me on all those different sites.
Awesome. And I think the two things that you guys, or the thing that you two have in common is that you both are into like the taboo busting. And I love that too, because I feel like there are so many aspects of my life that I feel like, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to talk about that with people. People get uncomfortable about that. But when it starts to like build up layer upon layer, I'm like, gosh, what can I talk about? Like, people need to just be able to start talking about stuff. So I love that both of you are pretty fearless in that and are willing to talk about things that make people uncomfortable. So tonight, I think we'll have a good opportunity to do that as we start digging into our bodies and all of that. So I'm going to start with you, Kat. So since I started chasing creation last year, I feel like this idea of just accepting our bodies has come up so much with the women that I talk to. And it makes sense because if you're going through infertility, you get into this weird mode where your body starts being seen as like this baby making machine, and it's like this thing that's supposed to be happening biologically, but it's not, and what's wrong with it. And then you add in the timed sex, and so sex becomes about that. It's just like so many layers of weirdness. Then there's a lot of people who also have chronic illness that gets piled on top of that, where a lot of women who face infertility also are having chronic illness related to their reproductive systems, whether it's, like you said, PCOS or endometriosis. And it just becomes these like layers, I feel like, of difficulty kind of accepting our bodies, and just feeling like they're not really doing what we want them to. And so one of the things I love about your blog is that it is very body positive, and has really good recommendations for how people can start reconnecting with their bodies and being more compassionate towards themselves and their bodies. And so I wanted to just hear if you have any recommendations or tips on how women can start doing that. Like if they are feeling just completely disconnected, what can they do to start just reconnecting with their bodies?
So I think for me, the biggest thing that helped me, because with me and my story is I struggled with infertility for many years. Since I was 25, I've struggled with infertility. And I didn't understand at that time that it was tied into endometriosis, and that is what was causing a lot of those issues. And it wasn't until actually this past year in October that I finally got the official diagnosis that I had endometriosis, and all of these things were confirmed. So for me, the process of trying to love and accept my body has been challenging, but the most important thing for me is, I guess, being real and not beating myself up for not always being 100% in love with my body, and to basically grieve the things and to feel the feels. So if I'm having a bad day and I'm feeling like frustrated that my body is not capable of doing something, or I'm frustrated that, I lost an ovary to endometriosis, is I feel those feelings and I grieve and I go through that process, but I don't stay there. So I allow myself to feel those feelings and I just move through it. And I think that's been the most important thing for me, is the grieving, the feeling of the feelings and the emotions, because it's normal and it's healthy to feel that way. It's healthy to be angry. It's healthy to be upset. And it's normal that you feel cheated, but to not stay there and let that ruin me or make me too bitter, but to process these feelings and to move through them and to find healthy ways of coping and healthy ways to move forward with that, and accepting my body, accepting myself, accepting the new weight gain that I have now, and what that looks like and what that feels like. And, being okay that I'm not going to be able to answer the questions of the future and all those different things, and just kind of accepting the process, if you will, if that makes sense at all. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's important too, because one of the things I hear from women, and I know I definitely have felt, is you just start to feel kind of disassociated or like disconnected with your body. And so I think that self-compassion is where you can start to integrate and feel like, okay, this is part of me. Like, I know, Heather, when I started seeing you, I think I would talk like that a lot. Like, ugh, my body's just this thing that I'm trapped in that just always does shitty things and I can't control it. And so, yeah, like, I think that self-compassion is just really important, to realize that, it's not always going to do what you want. And if you have a chronic illness, like you may have to learn how to continue to love it and be accepting and recognize all that comes with that, while still living with it, because it doesn't just magically go away or like fix itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think another thing to add to that as well is that understanding that, like, your body actually isn't really against you. I mean, it feels like it's against you, right? But it's not really against you. It's really trying to communicate and tell you that this is wrong. And like, I need you to listen to me, and I need you to lean in more in this area. And I know for me, when I lost my ovary, there was a huge grieving process that I went through. And it was like, it felt to me, as weird as it may sound, that not only did I grieve, but it was also like my body itself was grieving. It's like, my right ovary, lost its friend there, and now it's doing all the work. Now it's going through all this process. So I don't know, just me putting it into that kind of perspective really helped me in the grieving process. And it really helped me to connect to my body and not see it as the enemy, but also see it as like, we have a common enemy, and that is endometriosis, and that's infertility. It's not you that's the enemy. Let's just put the blame where the blame belongs. The blame belongs in endometriosis. It belongs on the faulty systems where we don't have the proper awareness, where we don't have the proper education to know and understand, to get it diagnosed sooner. So that's kind of when I made that shift. I stopped seeing my body as the enemy and the problem, and I started seeing, like, you're just trying to communicate with me. You just want me to know what's going on so that I can help you be and do better. So that also really helps me with my process with connecting back to my body.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And it's something I've tried to do too, is I think shifting from, like you said, being like, oh, that my body is something that I'm like at war with and that is always like failing me. I started trying to think about it more as think of all the things that it allows me to do, despite the fact that there's so much illness that it has to fight every day to be able to allow me to go on walks and experience nature and like taste amazing things and like all these things that it does allow me to do and experience joy and pleasure in all these different ways, and that it has to fight harder than most people's bodies do to allow me to do those things, but that it's like, yeah, it's not your body, it's like the disease that impacts it. And I really like what you said about like listening to that, and that your body is, you know, working really hard and trying to tell you what it needs. And maybe there's not always a solution exactly, because like I said, I don't know if I'll ever get to 100% pain free, but thinking about all the things that I can do despite having an illness has been really helpful for me too. So I really like that. Okay, I'm gonna move over to you, Heather.
Can I add one little
Oh
thing?
yeah, of
that?
course.
Just like I wanted to, like as someone who works with lots of people who have different kind of chronic pain and endometriosis and everything you're listing, like it's so okay to be pissed and frustrated too. You know, like, you know, it like, yeah, it like feel it all. Cause I think sometimes when we try to cut off the bad stuff, we shut ourselves off from like the good stuff too. So, you know, like being able to feel kind of that whole range and like really experience your joy and not have the wah associated with it, you know, and really be able to just be mad about something and, you know, without feeling like you're not going to be able to get over it. Yeah. So y'all are awesome.
Yeah, no, thanks for adding that. If anyone who follows me knows, I don't like the good vibes only toxic positivity stuff, because it just
Yeah.
it's not reality. So I'm with you, like being able to just take the time to process all the emotions that come with it, because there's going to be grief. Like if you experience infertility or your health is being impacted to where you can't do the things you want to do and you're in pain, like there's grief and loss and anger that comes along with that, and it's all totally justified because it's kind of a shit situation. So I think, yeah, it's like that balance of being able to embrace all of those things. And okay, so I am gonna have you tap into your sex counselor, sex educator role here, because I think that again, like, because when you're dealing with infertility, your body starts to be seen as this thing that's supposed to have this function of creating a child, and you're like working towards that goal and it's not happening, and all of a sudden, you know, your sex life shifts from pleasure to now we're like having time sex, and it becomes this biological process, and that can take the sexiness out of it. And again, if you have chronic illness, you're in pain a lot of the time, and maybe it doesn't feel good, or you're tired or whatever. It just can be really hard to tap back into those feelings of feeling sensual and feeling sexual. And so I not only mean this by just having sex with a partner, but even just how we feel about ourselves as like individual beings. Of like, I know I've gone through periods of time where my body just kind of felt like a blob, like a kind of thing that I was housed in, but it didn't feel like a center of pleasure, or I didn't feel sensual or sexy or like connected to myself in that way at all. And so I would love to hear your ideas for if people are finding themselves in that situation, how can they start to introduce those feelings back into their lives again, you know, with partners, but also just as themselves.
Yeah. So, because you know, you gave us these questions before, and I was kind of thinking through it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've got like 25 different angles on how I would want to answer it. I'll just wait and see how she asks it and see. And I still have 25 different angles on how I want to answer it. I think like the biggest factor so far is that factor, like you said, where all of a sudden, you know, sex becomes a function, like a job, a task in order to get something done, right? Which is super not erotic. Like there's very rarely anything sexy that happens from that kind of sex ever. I mean, as far as the kind that makes you feel like, you know, fulfilled and satisfied and all that. Not that you can't have satisfying, you know, sex, but I kind of just want to define like the way that when I talk about sex, like how I like to break it down a little differently. And I know often people with chronic illness and people, you know, with endometriosis are told like, oh, well, you can do other things and stuff like that. And so I just want to give like a warning that I'm going to be talking about other things, but it is not because of that. Okay. Like it's not that, oh, just do something else. It's and it's the same kind of talk that I give with anyone who's dealing with body things. I really like to be able to separate out like what's going on with your body, you know, and then what's going on with like your erotic self. Okay. If we can think of like those of like kind of the two different things that are housed with us, like sometimes body is like super in line with erotic self, right? And sometimes they are at polar opposite ends of any sort of spectrum, right? And so while we might have things that, you know, are going on with our body, or, you know, our body's not working for us in this way or something like that, if we just kind of take that piece out of it for a second and we think about like our erotic self, right? Or like the erotic self we want to have, or we're trying to find, or we lost, or we've never had, and we want to try to figure out where the heck it is at some point, you know, what that piece is, it's pleasure, but it's also just curiosity, right? So even if it's like, oh God, pleasure's so far from what I can even think about getting to, it's like being curious about kind of what might be possible, whether it's, you know, with yourself or if it's with another person. So I really, when I talk about like sex and all of that encompasses, I really like to define, and for the purpose of this, I'm not defining it as like reproductive sex, right? I'm defining it as like sex is the thing we do to co-create joy within ourselves or within a partnership, okay, or multiple partners, however you want to do it, you know. But so kind of looking at that part as more of like that erotic getting back to yourself piece of it, right? When we have the pain and, you know, anything else that's going on, that certainly is, it can act as more of a barrier to overcome with this stuff. But it's, you know, but sometimes it's possible, and sometimes it's not as much, you know. I do this same thing with any sort of like pelvic pain thing, like as we're working on getting, you know, our, you know, vaginas to feel better, as we are kind of going through and wanting to eventually add in a partner together. I really like to try to do like, it's like, all right, so we're going to make like vagina rehab separate than like our sexy self rehab, because when we try to keep those together all the time, it's just so very frustrating, because we don't really get to play here because it keeps getting stuck with but my vagina doesn't work, so how can I possibly feel sexy again? So having that feeling sexy again being like its own thing that is kind of separate from what your vagina is or isn't able to do at any given moment, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. So a few other little factors that I think are helpful to understand, and this is kind of like the, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't learn this as part of sex ed, it's so important sort of thing. One is the expectation of its desire, right? When we are usually young, when we get together with a partner, and I shouldn't say young, I should say anytime a relationship is young, right? Whenever you start off, often a couple will experience like all of the big exciting things, right? And sex, like desire, like you just want to have sex all of a sudden. And, you know, and if you, there might be factors to where that's not necessarily the case, but it is maybe more so the case that you would feel spontaneously desirous of sex, you know, at the beginning of a relationship. And then like as things kind of move on a little bit, then all of a sudden that sort of like isn't there anymore. And then there's extra layers of you know, of things that are going on, whether it's fertility, whether it's pain, whether it's, you know, life stress, financial stuff, you know, in-laws living with you. I mean, you know, so many different levels of things that can really make you not ever have either the time or the space to have that spontaneous desire anymore. But the thing we don't learn is like, that's totally normal. Like, even if you had like this perfect living on a beach scenario with no pain or issues and you were with the same partner, you're probably still not going to feel a whole lot of spontaneous desire, because we just shift in the way that we actually experience desire. And so what happens is we go from like the feeling of like, ooh, I want to engage in some sort of like sexual thing. And when I say, again, I'm talking about any of the pleasurable, feel good, engaging in curiosity thing, right? So I want to experience something like that. Whereas now you kind of have to like, it becomes responsive. So you have to start an experience to then actually want to do it, if that makes sense, right? So it's like, so I like to think of it as your initiation is more of like I'm game, you know, and then once you start, it's like, oh yeah, like I actually am pretty into this, and you know, this is fun, and this sort of playing it, you know, is enjoyable to me, and like, let's keep doing it. But I will also say that that has to come partnered with the ability to know that you can say stop there, that you don't want to, if you don't actually end up feeling like you want to, right? So if you feel like, and this happens so often, you know, with heterosexual women in relationship with a man, is that like, it's really, you don't want to initiate, because then you might feel like you are going to start something that like you can't finish, right? Or like it's like, I'm gonna have to stop and he's gonna feel rejected and it's just gonna be this giant mess. So it's easier not to stop at all than it is to try to do any sort of playful anything. Or like if I ask him to give me a back massage, he's gonna want to have sex, right? Something like that. So making sure that there's communication on the front end of that, to where it's like, look, I will, you know, there is potential that I will want to engage in more of this stuff and things that we can be creative with, you know, and get like, you know, kinkier sort of stuff even. Kink is great for anyone who's having body issues, because so much of kink, it all lives up here, you know, so that's definitely high on my recommendation list. But yeah, so this idea of like, if you can have that conversation and, you know, your partner knows that, all right, so if I initiate something, like if I say, hey, I would, you know, let's try this, like this sounds like something that might be fun, right? Well, and I know that I'm safe to say that if I know that once we get started, I can change my mind and say like, oh yeah, actually, that's not really what I wanted to do. Sorry. Like, you know, can we shift to something else? Like this might work, or, you know, sorry, maybe we can try like another time or something like that. But like that space is absolutely critical in feeling free enough to be able to even put your toe in the water, right? Because if you're not, then you're just setting yourself up for like, you know, an emotional train wreck, and a, you know, and if you're having an emotional train wreck and it becomes like a train wreck within your partnership too, and that just sucks, and who wants to sign up for that? So that is a conversation that I think is really important to have for anyone dealing with any sort of, you know, chronic illness, or, you know, anything that is going to potentially be something where you realize that once you start, you're going to need to stop. Like being able to have that conversation and what that looks like. And, you know, even talking about it like before of like, all right, so we can get started. Like, this sounds super fun. Let's try it out. Maybe if like that's not working, this would be something else we could maybe try out, you know, that sounds like fun. You know, but if it doesn't work, or if, you know, like, here's what I'm going to say, or I'm, you know, I'll tap you on the shoulder, or, you know, something like that, just so that you can already kind of talk through and know what it's going to be. So you don't have to just like hide your face in a pillow, you know, or something, you know, so that you have that way to go ahead and like kind of get out of it, right? Like gracefully, you've already talked about it, you know, and then what do you need afterwards, right? Like, is it something to where you already know that when you get kind of like, oh, that sucked, like, do you want to be like held and snuggled? Do you want like just a cup of tea and to be left alone? Like, what do you want, you know? And so if you can kind of have that expectation up front as well, then that can also be helpful, because, you know, a lot of times, you know, your partner's like, they really want to like know what to do for you. And so if we can give them that, and like you can salvage a not so great, you know, sexy time experience by really great aftercare a lot, right? Like if that like you attempted, it didn't go really great, but like, oh my God, let's just drink some chamomile tea and watch like while you were sleeping on Netflix or something, like, you know, that ends up being some pretty great sex. So yeah, so that's as far as, and then, you know, within that, that's not from like to say at all that there's like no that like, oh, that means no penetration. Like any sort of like penetration is a part of that. Like that all falls within it. It's just, it's not the whole pie. It's just a slice of the pie. And if you want that slice there, fine. But it's not the thing that is like the penultimate thing that you have to get to actually make it count, you know, for a sexual experience, when you're looking for a sexual experience that is hitting your erotic spaces, right? Like I said, it's kind of separating it from that functional, here's what we got to do sort of stuff. So hopefully that was helpful. I could talk for so long on that, but I'm going to back off.
Yeah, no, I think they're all such great suggestions. And I think, again, like if you're dealing with chronic pain, sometimes you don't know until you start getting into it exactly how your body will respond or how you're feeling. I am curious, just because I see a lot of ads come up for it, but have you heard of those ONA
Yes.
like rings that you can layer on?
They're amazing.
Yeah, okay. So for those of you, I don't know if you've seen this. I wasn't sure. I haven't used them, so I don't know, but I'm very curious because they look very interesting. But basically, if you guys haven't seen them, they're these like rings that kind of look like silicone donuts. I think they're
They're
silicone.
super stretchy.
Yeah, they're really stretchy, and it comes in like a pack of a few of them. But basically, the idea is you would put that on the penis, and if you have penetrative sex, it keeps the depth low, like more shallow, I guess, so that if it's deep penetrative sex is what hurts, that it keeps it from entering to that depth, I guess. So
Yeah.
I have not tried these, but I keep seeing ads come up on Instagram for them, and they look very interesting. So I don't know, are there other things that you know of that have been helpful to clients that you've had?
That has I think that's been like my number one favorite thing for especially for people who are having pain with any sort of like depth penetration. Right now, if it's pain at the opening, then that's not really going to help. But yeah, they're basically, it's penis bumpers. And the thing about them being stackable is great because like if one day you're like, oh, like, because at different hormonal times, everything can kind of be sitting at different levels. So it might be that it's, it shifts from day to day, or week to week as far as what depth is actually more comfortable. So to be able to like, yeah, like customize your penis length is kind of great.
Yeah, so I feel weird recommending them because I haven't actually checked them out, but I haven't used them.
I
But
would
they seem
totally recommend them.
okay. Yeah, they seem
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah.
I would just add another thing that has been on my mind a lot this last year, as I have been, I had my hysterectomy like 2 years ago, and I had my pelvic floor therapy, which has helped a lot with pain, and so I am getting to a place where my pain levels are just, I don't want to say like non-existent because I still have bad days and there's still some issues there, but definitely have the least pain that I've ever had. And I thought that that would automatically correspond to me like getting my libido back, and it hasn't necessarily. And so I've been focusing a lot on just thinking more about how I can start incorporating like sexy thoughts and feelings like into my life just individually, and then if that can at some point also um, move over to like my relationship. So just um, anything I can do to help see myself as like a sexual being again. So taking more time to masturbate or like read erotica, or just things that help me get into that mindset where I'm thinking about it and connecting with it more. I feel like has been helpful for me because I think I just kind of shut myself off to it entirely, to where it's been really hard for me to get into that, like you said, not even the physical space, but even just the erotic space mentally, like within myself, but also with my partner. It's really hard to rekindle that because I think it, for a lot of reasons, with all the medical stuff happening in the last couple of years, it just shut off a bit. So Kat, I do have a different question for you, but do you have anything you want to add to this conversation before I move on?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I was trying to think of something and I'm like, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, no worries at all.
And Katie, I would love
Yeah.
to add that, like, so what you just said, that whole feeling of like, I thought that once my pain went away, that my sexual return would, or my sex drive would come back. That I think is one of like the biggest fallacies that is put forth in the women's health community, right? Because a lot of times, like medical providers who do women's health don't actually get any legit like sexuality training, and it's all built on that, right? Well, of course you don't want to have sex. Why would you want to have sex? You have pain, right? Which then leads you to think that if you no longer have pain, then of course you're going to want to have sex again. But like I can, there's all sorts of people who don't have pain, who have lots of issues with not wanting to have sex. And once you're in that pattern of like not having, like you said, all of that, like those erotic patterns, and it's like you're out of practice with that direction. And so it doesn't just like come bouncing back. So yeah, I would love to talk about kink with you sometime too.
All right.
Because so much fun stuff. Yeah.
All right, maybe we'll do another webinar in the future, actually.
Yeah.
I did think of one thing though that I was just thinking of, like for me personally, when it came to kind of reintroducing sex back into the dynamic with my husband, something that helped me was actually learning more about my anatomy. I found that the more that I took the time to educate myself on my anatomy, to educate myself on my reproductive organs, educate myself on my vagina, and actually knowing and being able to label and understand what made up my vagina, what was the actual technical name for different things, it really helped me connect with my body as a sexual being in a whole new light, in a whole new way that I wouldn't have considered that doing that or something like that, or educating myself on those things would kind of trigger that, but it kind of did in a weird way. I don't know. I'm strange, so.
No, that's 100% accurate. And I think one of the biggest things that like we can learn about that is that like the things that actually make us have orgasms have zero to do with reproduction, right? So like your clitoris, right? That's the part that actually is where all of those nerve endings to come together and where all of your feel good stuff happens. Like that has nothing to do with any sort of baby making, right? Like it is a completely separate, it's like the party girl of your crotch, right? So, you know, so when we think about that whole, like, you know, it really, that like your pleasure and your erotic self and like your body, you know, it is not just that sex is there for procreation, right? Like the vast majority of sex is not had for procreation. So, yeah, so that's always a piece to remember with it too, when everything feels so wrapped up in like the thing.
Yes. Okay. Well, I love all of this, and I think I see some of. Are these the flowers you were talking about that are blooming?
Yes, do you
We
see
have
them?
two of them. You are like right on with the hour. Like
it's always is between like 8:15 and 8:45.
Yeah, they're very pretty.
Yeah.
All right, let's see. I'm gonna go to we have in the chat box some people who have joined us. We've got someone in Waynesville that I know, a friend, who's drinking vodka and blood orange soda. Good choice. We have someone in Vancouver, Canada that is drinking water because she has a client later. We've got someone drinking sparkling water and tea. Someone in Minneapolis who just had dental work done. Ooh, sorry. Who's sticking to water because of that. So welcome everyone. If you want to introduce yourself. Ooh, a new one. Pinot Grigio in South Los Angeles. Hello.
Nice.
So welcome everyone. I do have a few more questions, and then we're going to move into Q&A. So if you guys have questions for my guests, feel free to start adding those now, and then we'll have some to go over once we get to that point in a few minutes. So, all right. So Kat, I'm going to come back to you with another question, and it a little bit builds on what we already talked about. And hopefully it's not too similar, because now that I'm reading it, I'm like, this is very similar to what we already kind of talked about. But just in this, you know, mindset of these negative kind of messages that we tell ourselves, like we talked about, oh, my body's broken, it doesn't do what it's supposed to, it's just in pain all the time. That idea, you know, you talked about just feeling that you're at war with your body. Do you have any suggestions for kind of how do you stop yourself in that negative self-talk and start to like shift your mindset for how you're thinking about it into something more positive? Because I think that's part of what happens is we get these like negative messages going, and it's something we like never say to a friend or a sister or someone we love, but like it's very easy for us to just rail on ourselves and say those. So I just am curious if you have any suggestions on how we can start to shift that when we see ourselves getting into those negative self-talk patterns.
So something that I like to do is I try to analyze and pay attention to what's going on around me and what could precipitate or cause me to have those negative thoughts in my head. So the best way I can do that is, or the best example I can use to illustrate that is if I start to think about my stomach, because that's like something that's a sore point with me post-surgery. If I start having negative thoughts about my stomach and how it's disgusting because I have the post-surgery incision or the scar on there, I usually can trace that back to me being on Instagram, scrolling and comparing my body to other women. So taking the time to like really do some backtracking mentally and like, well, where is this thought coming from and why am I thinking this way? What precipitated this and what caused this? Does this come from me? Something that I need to work on with myself? Or is this coming because I'm comparing my body to someone else? Or is this a comment that somebody made? So usually doing that and just really tracing back to specific events or conversations or things that I've been watching can usually illuminate for me the reason that I have those negative thoughts happening.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Not comparison. I think it's a comparison thing is hard, but it's also just the messages that we get societally of here's what a woman's supposed to look like. And I think it's hard no matter what, but then when you add in the chronic illness and infertility, it just adds these layers of just feeling like your body is not living up to what it was supposed to or how other people perceive it. I think we can also sometimes get into this societal view of seeing women either as like sexual beings and partners, and then your mom, a mom. So like as you age, you become a mom, and that's like your value. And it's really hard to find that space of like almost feeling like you have to prove to society that you have value outside of those two. Like you're a sexual object or you're a mom. Like those are,
right.
If you're not that, what are you? And I know that's not, I mean, I don't believe that. I'm not saying that's what I think, but it's hard because I feel like we do get these societal messages of, you know, those are the two places where we see value for you.
And I feel like as women with endometriosis, it's hard for us to find a space because our bodies are in constant like flux. They're constantly changing, you know, there's endobelly, there's days where we have like intense pain. And even when you have your surgery, you still have the healing process. You have, you know, the scars, all of these things. So it's like you can't really see yourself in, you know, what society is trying to tell you to pick a side. Are you this sexy, you know, attractive, hot woman, or are you the mother? And sometimes it's hard to reconcile that when you have endo and you're struggling with infertility because you're like, well, I'm neither right now. So thank you very much. So it's kind of hard to find where you fit, and you kind of have to create or make your own space and kind of say, forget that, and make your own space and stand in that.
Yeah.
So that whole conundrum of like, am I the sexy woman or am I a mom, right? Those are both roles that we play in regards to what is our relationship to men, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the answer to all of this was, of course, like burn down the patriarchy, right? Like, you know, but like, you know, but it's that thinking of like, who am I in service to? Who am I good to? Who am I here for? Like, you know, as opposed to anything of us being ourselves, right? I'm gay, and when I was married to a man for a long time, and when I like went from being like, you know, married to a man in what I thought was as straight as I could be, I learned later that, oh no, that actually wasn't as straight as I thought it was. But and now I'm partnered with a woman, and I remember having this like amazing like this veil was lifted of like, oh my God, my value has nothing to do with any of the men around me, and I don't actually have to be pleasing to any of them. You know, it was this really kind of amazing thing, like, you know, from that, like that, you know, well, what is my role? How do I have to fit? And it's like, oh, actually, all of that is, that's all bullshit, you know, for everyone, you know, not just because if you can't fit into one of those roles, but even if you do fit into one of those roles, you still end up in the same conundrum, right? Yeah. Like, am I only valued for my body? Am I only, you know, Logan's mom, Parker's mom? Like, is that all I am to the world? You know, so.
Yep.
Holy crap. Yeah. So burn it down. Sorry.
All right. We are a little short on time I want to make sure we have time for Q&A, but I think the next question I have for you, Heather, is super important. Wow, and the flowers behind you have just completely opened up. That's crazy.
Isn't that so neat? This one right here is about to go.
And so those only last one day, like those will fall off tomorrow and be gone.
Yeah.
Wow. We are all witnessing a miracle here.
See, I just pulled one off. Let's see if it'll still go.
Yeah, oh, those are so pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew those were going to distract me throughout. I keep like checking them out to see how they've opened up.
It's going. It's going. I think it'll still do it even though I picked it. Maybe. And they kind of pop open. Do I need to help it? Oh well, yeah, but then they'll pop. I'll wait and see if it does it. Yeah. So.
All right. So the last question that I had for you before we go into questions from people joining, and actually one of them just asked this question, so it's perfect because we already had it on our list. But so I met you because I needed a pelvic floor therapist, and so for those of you who aren't familiar with my background, I had 20 years of endometriosis that was not diagnosed for that long and was causing a lot of pain, but doctors were just saying that nothing was wrong. So I was living in severe pain, but not knowing what to do about it. So I had that, and then had 2 different surgeries for the endometriosis, where I had excision surgery and ended up having a hysterectomy for to help with pain, but also for fibroids. They kept coming back. So that helped a lot, but I was still having some pain, like vaginal pain and pelvic pain. And so physical therapy helped me a lot because it helped me understand that some of my muscles and those pelvic floor muscles had gotten used to acting a certain way based on responding to pain or based on whatever through all the years that I went undiagnosed. And so it's really hard. I think it can be really complicated to try to sort out what's causing what when you have a lot of different pain sources with chronic illness. But for me, I think I was surprised I thought, oh, they must have just missed endometriosis. They didn't get it all or whatever. But I have been really surprised and pleased at how much progress I've been able to make on this remaining pain through doing pelvic floor therapy. And so, Heather, I'm just hoping that you can educate us a little bit more on kind of what it is and how to know if someone might be a good candidate for it. So I think let's start with what are some of the most common conditions that you treat, and how would someone know if they may benefit from pelvic floor therapy?
So let's see. So are we talking about, do you want to talk about pain issues, chronic pain issues, stuff like that?
Yeah, I think most of the people listening are probably have chronic illness related to reproductive issues mostly, but we could have a few more, but I think that's mostly my audience is probably in that vein.
So I would say, I think just to kind of put this out to make sure I feel like I'm not missing it, if you're having any sort of issues that with urinary incontinence, or difficulty urinating, or constipation, or difficulty having a bowel movement, or having to strain a lot, or bowel incontinence, or anything like that. So if that is a piece to what you've got going on, pelvic floor therapy, it can absolutely, or I shouldn't say absolutely, but in many cases can be very helpful with that stuff. And especially if it is layered on top of a pain issue, right? So now we'll talk more just about just the pain issues, right?
Yeah, well, and I know also that a lot of women who have endometriosis could also have, I'm probably going to say it wrong, interstitial cystitis.
I see is way easier, right?
Okay, I see. I'm probably saying it wrong, but I got diagnosed with it too. And I know that can cause some different bladder issues, so.
Yeah. So the thing with pelvic PT is we can't fix endometriosis, and we can't fix IC, and we can't fix, a lot of these different issues. After cancer, we can't fix, pain from radiation burns, things like that. But often what happens is that the pain that people are experiencing is not actually from that process, right? It's not or maybe 25% of your pain is from, endometriosis, but 75% of it is actually, like you said, from what your muscles in your body are doing to respond to that. And so I would say if you're having any just chronic pelvic pain issue, a pelvic physical therapist should definitely be on your team. Just because, if there's anything at all that is making you just feel like you need to protect your underneath side of your body, right? So your body's going to do that, right? Your your muscles are going to respond by like trying to protect and hold. And that trying to protect and hold, it's like, this is kind of the analogy I give. If you can see my shoulders here, I've got, this is kind of fun. It looks like I'm underwater in a pool. I've got my phone light on me here. But so if you've got like your shoulders and, you know, you feel like, oh, something is going to come along and hurt my neck, like at any given time, I don't know what it's going to be, but there's going to be something that, you know, injures my neck. I'm just going to protect it like this, right? Like I'm just going to walk around and make sure that like I'm protecting it. And this is what you do all the time in response to it. And then you end up with all this pain, right? Well, some of that pain might be the thing that's happening with your neck, but a whole lot of it is from your walking around like this, you know. And so then one of the things that happens is people are like, oh, you have pain, you know, down in your pelvic floor. Oh, it's a pelvic floor issue. You should do pelvic floor squeezes. You should do Kegels, right? So you're already all jacked up like this, and now you're trying to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze, and then it makes it worse and hurt more. So most often when you're having any sort of issues with pelvic pain, those are the ones like you don't necessarily want to just like try stuff on your own. Like you want to go to a pelvic PT if you have access to one and try to figure out like, okay, what is my pelvic floor doing, and teach me how, like, so that I can understand. Is it that it's like weak and not doing its thing well, or is it because it's too tight? Because it's a very different thing to do with each of those directions. And it might be, and sometimes it's a little bit of each, like it's weak, so it's not doing its thing, but it's tight, like it's too short, but then it's also weak. And so there's different kind of pieces, and you sort of need to go like with a certain, you know, kind of manage one piece of it first and then move on to the other piece. Because if you do it backwards, then you can just make it a little worse, if that makes sense. So yeah, but so, and basically just to do a little anatomy lesson, like your pelvic floor muscles, if you can just, if you're all kind of sitting where you are, if you can feel like your pubic bone in the front is where they attach on the front, and then your tailbone in the back is where they attach on the back. And so they make a whole hammock that goes the whole zone. It's like a bowl on the bottom of your pelvis. And so that whole area, so it's a pretty big set of muscles there. Like sometimes I think when people have been taught about their, like how to do a Kegel, you know, they're like, oh, squeeze like you're trying to stop the flow of urine. And then they just do this like little dink, like they're just trying to like squeeze around a tube, but it's actually like this big kind of lift and relax. But sometimes that whole lift is just kind of stays too high and it doesn't want to like let go. And so it's that letting go that you have to figure out how to do first. Yeah, it's made up of several different muscles and all that. We don't need to really go into that much anatomy, but to kind of understand where it is.
Well, and I think that's what surprised me the most when I started doing pelvic floor therapy was I didn't even realize like how tight I was holding everything, because I didn't know what it felt like to have that relaxed. So
right.
Being able to learn different like breathing exercises that could help those muscles relax, or different stretches that helped open them up and help them relax. It's like I didn't even know how to identify. I didn't know you could release that tension there. Like I didn't know that was possible. And because it just been, like you said, just clenched for so many years, for so long, that I didn't know there was an alternative. So I still have to catch myself all the time throughout the day, like tensing up and having to, but now I have the tools of like, okay, I know how to do stretches and deep breathing that can help me actually identify those muscles. Cause even with like relaxation, it's always that diaphragmatic breathing, or like how to breathe into your stomach. And this is like how to breathe actually into like that pelvic floor area that just is like a whole different thing. And so that was very cool for me to learn, because
cool.
like I said, I didn't even know that existed. So
yeah.
So if for women who are having conditions like endometriosis, pelvic pain, painful sex, what could they expect from a physical therapist? Like what do sessions kind of look like, and how does it actually help?
So I guess it depends a little bit on what therapist you go to as far as what your session's going to look like. Generally speaking, though, the first thing we always need is we need to get like the story of what's going on with you, you know. So the first one is generally going to be the majority talking. We talk about, you know, we go through and talk about bowel, we talk about bladder, we talk about any sort of like supportive function, we talk about sexual function, you know, like just kind of, we try to get the whole picture because the whole picture really matters. You know, sometimes when you look at the anatomy images, everything looks so far apart, but really like pee, poo, and sex all happen within like this much space. And so often if there's an issue with one, there's, you know, you'll see an issue with another one too. And sometimes like the pain can be coming not from pelvic floor stuff, but from like constipation, right? Or like there can be lots of different factors. And so, so we just try to really make sure that we're going to go in and actually treat the right thing. And we're also kind of trying to make a list of the things that are like the most relevant. Like, okay, this is sort of the layers in which we need to start sort of peeling this back to sort of figure out what to do. So yeah, and not always, but often, if you are game to have an internal evaluation done at the first visit, then sometimes, especially for pelvic pain issues, that I tend to do that more for pelvic pain issues as opposed to just like with incontinence issues. But the thing is, it's handy for an internal assessment, and I say that, but like if you're like, oh my gosh, like I hurt so bad, I would absolutely not go to a pelvic PT if I have to have an internal assessment. You don't have to have an internal assessment. Like even if it's just like stretches and talking you through things, like you'll get so much good out of it even without an internal assessment. What the internal assessment does is kind of two things. Well, first I should say there's no like speculum, no stirrups, no big light in your crotch. It's not like a gynecology exam. We usually just use like one gloved finger, and basically what we're doing is like, I like to think of it as like we're your pelvic tour guide sort of thing. So we're just sort of trying to teach you where all these muscles are and where all these structures are and what's going on, so we can figure out when you're like, oh yeah, that actually right there, that's really uncomfortable. We can sort of figure out what that is. And then usually on the spot, we'll start working with you to see like, okay, so this is uncomfortable, so I'm going to back off of it a little bit. And now let's see if we can figure out how to get your brain to connect to that area. Now that you're aware of where that is and what that is, I'll talk you through some tricks to try to let that piece let go a little bit. And so usually, you know, we're kind of trying to talk you through some treatment, and so you can kind of understand, and because then those tools are going to be what you take away and what you start using, right? Because we don't want you to hurt. We don't want the assessment to be painful. We want to learn things about your body, but then we also want you to learn things about your body while we're doing any sort of testing. So yeah, and then past that, as far as like what treatment looks like, it completely depends. Like some people, it might just be that it's like, oh yeah, some like stretches and things are really helpful. So let's make sure we can, you know, and maybe like if you're like, oh, I actually love yoga, like I do yoga all the time. I would love, you know, we might tailor it to where it's like, all right, let's do all of like figure out a good yoga flow routine that you can do that will help you with your pelvic floor stuff. So it's just kind of depending on like what works for you in your life, you know, and what do you want to do. Same thing with sex, like, you know, what are your sexual goals? You know, it's not just like, oh, well, you're in PT and we want everyone's sex life to look like A, B, C, D. It's no, what is it to you? Like what's important, so that we can help you get to whatever it is you want. So yeah. And that thing of like, once you figure out like you've been clenching your pelvic floor all the time, like I hear that all the time. People are like, oh my gosh, I do it all day, every day. I've realized this now. Like I'm just constantly clenched.
Yeah. And I think it makes sense if you're responding to pain in your body all the time, that you're
right. And it's your whole body that does it.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to ask, just to be mindful of everyone's time, we are at an hour, but do you guys have just like a few more minutes so we can do a couple quick questions, or do you have a hard stop?
I'm okay for a few more minutes.
Kat, are you okay for a few minutes?
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cool. So one thing I wanted to piggyback on what you said, Heather, with the internal exam, because I think that might be something that for a lot of women just feels kind of uncomfortable, or that it would be so awkward that might be like a barrier to them wanting to go. But I will just say from my experience, because I have seen a couple of different pelvic floor therapists and had the same experience with all three, and that they have been so gentle and so patient and very interested in the experience I was having. Like I think sometimes with doctors that I've seen for endometriosis or gynecologists, they can be pretty rough, and like I had a vaginal ultrasound a couple months ago and was almost in tears because it hurt so bad. And the lady just looked at me like I was crazy. And that is not the experience I've had with any of the pelvic floor therapists. I've seen 3 over the last few years. Heather was my most recent, but just that they, you know, if it's starting to hurt, if they start, you know, inserting a finger and there's pain there, they'll back off and say, you know what, let's try again next week. And let's see if we can go a little bit deeper next week. But it is a very like patient, gentle thing. So it's not, again, they're not wanting to cause you more pain. And so they're very cognizant of that. So if that's something that, as you're hearing this, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want anyone putting anything in me because it hurts. Like they know that, and that's why you're there. And so I just wanted to reiterate that like my experience with a few different people has been very positive in working with my body and being very gentle and like working with me with where I'm at. And also that of course insurance can vary, but the different pelvic floor therapists I saw were all in network with my insurance, and I just paid a copay. So, you know, sometimes we do procedures that are, or see doctors that we have to end up paying out of pocket if it's like a specialist or something. Again, it could vary, I'm sure, with your specific plan or the individual therapist, but it was something that for me was covered. So if that's a barrier for you too, something to look into. Okay, so I don't know if anyone on this call will feel comfortable answering this. I absolutely would not, but someone asked, can you share advice surrounding regulating hormones and getting rid of that ick feeling? I know nothing about regulating hormones, so I'm out.
Not within my scope of things that I recommend, unfortunately.
Okay, Kat, are you out too?
Yeah, I don't.
Okay,
yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, Emily. None of us are experts in that. I know like my endometriosis specialist in Chattanooga has someone on staff who specifically works on, she's like a hormone specialist where that's like all she does is help you get regulated with everything. So I would say, I don't know, maybe, you know, maybe finding a specialist where this is like what they do. Maybe you've already tried that. I don't know. Sorry, this is not my area at all. So, someone asked what color of lipstick I'm wearing. I don't know, actually. It's a Kat Von D one, but I don't know what the color is. It looks red on here, but it's actually kind of plummy one, but yeah. Okay. So the other question here is, do you have suggestions about how to respond to others who don't understand your chronic pain? So how do you respond to someone, for example, who says, you know, it's just cramps, not a big deal. Just, I think this is something that all of us with chronic pain conditions can, it resonates with us because it is hard for people to understand that you may always be in pain, or like it's really that bad and you have to go to work anyway or do things anyway, even though you feel really awful. So I don't know, do you guys have suggestions for, and I don't know if she means people in her personal life or being dismissed by doctors, but you know, just generally, do you guys have any advice on this?
I guess it depends on who. So I would say if it's your doctor that's kind of dismissing your pain, I would say get another doctor, honestly. If they're not taking your pain seriously, that to me is a red flag that they're not taking you seriously, and you need to find another doctor that's going to listen to you and that will hear you out when it comes to your pain points and that wants to get to the root cause of it. Now, if it's like a coworker or, you know, an acquaintance or a passing person, typically with me, when it's kind of those people, I really don't correspond or try to correct. I try to get better at it, but I usually would just shut down and just be like, you know what, I'm not going to talk to you anymore because that's really rude. And I'm just going to remove myself from the situation. That's usually what I do is when I'm around people that, you know, are passing through my life and they say things that are triggering or rude or hurtful, I just remove myself from their presence and I limit my exposure to them. Now, when it's family and they're saying hurtful things, I do go into more depth of explaining and educating them as to why it's hurtful, first and foremost, and letting them know that no, it's not just cramps. I have a chronic illness and this is what it does and this is the pain that it caused and this is how it disrupts my life. It's debilitating pain for a reason. And I go into more depth with explaining to them what's going on. And sometimes they're not always quick to listen to you, but I think that the more that you do it, the more that you explain to them what's going on, they typically do come around. So that's kind of my process. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Heather, do you have anything that you would add to that?
No, I'm cracking up here. I guess I was thinking it would stay light longer. I look like I'm supposed to be telling like a scary story right now. The only thing that I would add would be just as far as like a little insight into like when you're talking to your doctor, because a lot of times, and I would totally agree with like if your doctor doesn't believe you or your doctor is giving you like any sort of like, well, I just think you're crazy vibes, absolutely find another doctor, right? But kind of sometimes some of the like the code words, because you know doctors see a lot of patients, you know, and that come in and they just have to kind of quickly assess like who's feeling what. And so it is a little like it doesn't fit within their pattern when they see someone coming in looking all put together, like looking all, you know, nice and saying, yes, I am constantly in 10 out of 10 pain, right? Like that's like it's like it doesn't like add up for them, right? So sometimes, and I'm not like, I'm not trying to defend it at all, if that makes sense. I'm just saying, you know, like when you're doing a job over and over and over again, like sometimes it's hard to really kind of like figure that out. And especially because they, you know, you've been dealing with it for so dang long that you've gotten really good at pretending like it's not there, you know, and they pick up on that. So if they are not super privy to like understanding what's going on with you, sometimes I think it's helpful to say things like, yes, like when I say my pain is at this level, I absolutely understand what the pain scale is. I've been dealing with this pain so long that I'm really good, like say the things that they're thinking of so they don't have to like do this mental gymnastics, you know, like, yes, I can put myself together. Yes, I can look very nice. If I thought that going to the emergency room in any way would help this pain right now, I would absolutely go, right? But it doesn't. And I'm here, and this is what it's like for me all the time. You know, just it's like, and I know that was kind of like a big speech, but it's just like to kind of like give them that, like, yeah, this is what's going, this is my story. This is why I look like this. No, I'm not just saying 10 out of 10 because, you know, I'm full of drama or drug seeking or any of the other things that might be clicking through their brains as far as why they're there. And again, if you think your doctor's an asshole, find another doctor. So.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I have definitely had to go through a lot of doctors to find the ones. For me, it was finding like endometriosis specialists where this is what they do all day, every day, and we're really like knowledgeable about it, that I didn't have to try to describe it to them or convince them, because they were like, oh yeah, I get it. Like I know how painful this is. So
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was our last question. So let's go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much, both Kat and Heather, for joining and having this conversation with me. I hope that you guys will look both of them up. Again, you can find Heather at Vino and Vulvas on Instagram. And then what's your other one?
It's Heather Edwards Creations. So it's
all
like
right.
all artwork stuff.
Okay, cool. And then Kat, let us know again where people can connect with you.
So you can find me on Instagram at Femmepower Health Blog, on YouTube at Femmepower Health, and my website, femmepowerhealth.com.
Yes, and please do, you guys. Kat's blog is amazing, and her Instagram content, she'll do like kind of like, I don't want to say mini blogs because they're not blogs, but like just very helpful information in like short paragraphs that are easily digestible, and then you can go to the blog for like longer explanations or like more information. But she's so consistent as a blogger. Like I blog like once every 2 months now, but she's very consistent and covers a lot of different topics. So if you're someone who struggles with endometriosis or like chronic illness, just really great content. So for both my guests, please check them out. Next month, I'll be doing a webinar where my guest is going to be Jody Day from Gateway Women. So I'm super excited. If you don't know who she is like the mother of the childless, not by choice community, because she has written books about it, and we're going to be talking about how to find meaning beyond children. And she's just amazing. If you don't have her book, you should get it. We'll be talking about that too. So join us next month. And yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you. It was lovely.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.